About a year ago, I received a newsletter from author Sahil Bloom. It discussed an interview that golfer Scottie Scheffler gave prior to the 2025 Open Championship, and it really stuck with me. I often bring it up in conversation with clients who are approaching retirement, and so I thought it would be worth discussing here on the podcast as well. In July of 2025, Scheffler was the number one ranked golfer in the world, coming off of the most dominant season in recent memory, and he was sitting at a press table when the reporter asked him what was a pretty simple question about joy and celebration.
What would be the longest you've ever celebrated something?
It feels like you work your whole life to celebrate winning a tournament for like a few minutes. It only lasts a few minutes, that kind of euphoric feeling. And you win it, you celebrate, you get to hug my family, my sister's there. It's such an amazing moment. And then it's like, okay, now what are we gonna eat for dinner?
The number one golfer on the planet, multiple major championships, tens of millions of dollars, and when the trophy is lifted, that feeling fades and life goes on. When I heard this, I didn't think about golf. I thought about the people I sit across from in my office. People who have worked years, maybe 30 or 40, building their portfolio, counting down the day until they can finally say, I'm done. They had a clear picture in their heads of what that moment would feel like. But for so many, when that moment actually arrives, it doesn't feel the way that they thought it would. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Where that feeling comes from, and more importantly, what we can do about it. I'm Patrick Briscoe, and this is episode 11 of the Canadian Retirement Roadmap podcast. One more thing before we get started. I've put together a reading list for this episode, 5 books that I genuinely recommend to anyone working through this topic. We'll get to that list a little later on, and if you're a client, you'll have the opportunity to receive a complimentary copy. You can find that list and a companion guide to this episode at bayswaterwealth.ca/podcast. All right, now let's get started. So what exactly is the arrival fallacy, and why does it hit retirees so hard? Psychologist Ben-Shahar, who taught one of Harvard's most popular courses on happiness, gave us the term. The arrival fallacy is the false belief that reaching a specific goal or milestone will create lasting happiness and contentment. We build up a destination in our mind. We say things like, when I retire, then I'll relax. Or, once the mortgage is paid off, then I'll breathe. Or, when I hit $2 million, then I'll finally feel secure. Then we finally hit that number or reach that date, the briefcase gets handed back, the last staff meeting ends, someone brings in a cake, and we wait for that feeling. Sometimes that feeling does come for a few minutes, and then someone asks about dinner. In his book, The 5 Types of Wealth, Sahil Bloom describes it beautifully. He writes that the arrival fallacy keeps us chasing trophies, money, status, titles, assuming that our real life starts on the other side of the next achievement. We reach the summit, and instead of contentment, we just find ourselves back at the bottom looking for the next mountain. This image of continually climbing the mountain comes from Greek mythology. Sisyphus was a king condemned to an eternity of pushing a boulder up a steep hill, only to watch it roll back down just before he reached the top. And he had to do this over and over for all of eternity. And we're all Sisyphean in a way. We all have our boulders. Yours might be getting your RSP balance to a specific dollar amount, handing in your notice, or paying off your mortgage. And there's nothing wrong with boulders, having goals, targets, deadlines. It is what keeps us moving. The problem comes when we believe that the top of the hill is where happiness lies. At an awards ceremony, actor Jim Carrey once said, "I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so that they can see it's not the answer." And that's not cynicism from Carrey, it's wisdom that was earned the hard way. He had everything external culture told him would make him whole, and it took having it to realize that it was never going to deliver the peace that it promised. And Scheffler said something similar, and in a way a little bit more instructive. A few days after that press conference that I talked about, he ended up winning that Open Championship. And he was asked again about what drives him. And what he said was pretty telling. He said, "I would much rather be a great father than a great golfer." What's significant about that is the consistency. He just won one of the 4 most prestigious tournaments in golf, and his answer hadn't changed. His identity isn't built around the trophies, it's built around something that existed before them. and will continue to exist after them. That kind of clarity about what matters is rare, and it's exactly what most people are searching for when they walk into retirement. So how does this actually show up for someone entering retirement in Canada? To answer this question, I want to introduce you to someone I'll call Grace. Grace is 63. She spent 32 years as a plant manager for a national manufacturer, and she was good at her job, respected in her industry, and she ran her personal finances with the same discipline that she brought to work. By the time she was ready to retire, she had just over $1.4 million in registered and non-registered investments, a pension from her employer, and a plan to start CPP at age 65. Her picture of retirement was pretty clear. Morning coffee, waking up without an alarm, traveling to see her 3 adult kids, a bit of volunteering, and in her words, finally having time to myself. She retired in October, and by January, she was back in my office. Her plan was working just fine. More than enough income to cover her lifestyle, her travels, everything. What she wasn't prepared for had nothing to do with money. She said something along the lines of, "Patrick, I thought I would feel like I had finally arrived. Instead, I feel like I'm waiting for my life to start, and I can't figure out what I'm waiting for." Grace had run headlong into the arrival fallacy. So what causes this feeling of perpetually wanting? Well, 2 things were contributing to Grace's experience, and have probably contributed to the experiences of a lot of people listening right now. And they are biology and bias. First was the biology of the dopamine drop. Dopamine is the chemical in your brain that gets released when you're working towards something. It's actually more about the anticipation than it is about the achievement. It's why when you're hungry, the better food tastes. Increasingly intense hunger pains are your body's way of building anticipation so that you're more motivated to eat. The exact same meal will taste a lot better after skipping lunch than it would after an all-you-can-eat buffet. And the research in neuroscience is pretty clear. We get more dopamine from the chase than we do from the catch. That means that your brain is wired to love working towards retirement more than actually being in it. And this happens all the time. It shows up after weddings, graduations, big promotions. You've spent months, sometimes years, in heightened anticipation for these events. Then the event happens and your brain chemistry drops back to the baseline and sometimes even below baseline. But that disappointment once the dopamine drops isn't a weakness, it's something we all go through. Not only is it completely normal, it's actually something that we should be planning for because we know it's going to happen. The second thing was proportionality bias. So proportionality bias is our instinct to believe that big effects have big causes. On a large scale, this bias is what leads people to believe in conspiracy theories because we're naturally inclined towards balance. We want to believe that something with such massive effect on the world must have had an equally massive cause. On a more personal level, this bias is what leads us to believe that big events, such as retirement, should produce equally big and lasting feelings. If we spend 40 years working towards something, then surely the payoff should be more than a few weeks of excitement. But it doesn't actually work that way. Psychologists call this hedonic adaptation. The new car stops feeling new, the corner office stops feeling special, and retirement, no matter how hard earned, starts to feel like Tuesday. Retirement is a big change, but eventually you adapt and the feeling of newness fades. None of this means retirement is bad, it just means the feelings that come with it are human. But if all of this is so normal, why aren't we prepared for it? The myth of the golden years is worth pulling apart. It tells us that retirement is supposed to be a continuous state of bliss, earned through decades of hard work. The idea originated in the post-war era with the generation that essentially invented retirement as we know it. Work hard, stop at 65, collect a pension, play golf until you can't. It was a specific social contract for a specific time. Today's retirees no longer fit that mold though. You're healthier, you're living longer, and you're more complex than such a limited idea. You've built an identity over 35 years. You have skills, networks, rhythms, and a sense of status that are all tied to work. When work ends, all of that shifts all at once. Most people spend far more time planning the financial transition than they do planning the identity transition. But those aren't independent from one another. So let's talk about how to plan for both. So if money isn't the whole answer, what else should we be planning for? Sahil Bloom's book, The 5 Types of Wealth, offers a framework that maps almost perfectly onto what I see in my practice. Bloom argues that we've been trained to think of wealth as financial, but real wealth actually has 5 dimensions: time, social, mental, physical, and financial. Each of these begs a different question. Time wealth asks, do you control how you spend your hours? Social wealth asks, do you have deep, meaningful relationships? Mental wealth asks, are you mentally engaged, challenged, and growing? Physical wealth asks, are you healthy enough to enjoy the life that you've built? And finally, financial wealth asks, do you have enough money to fund the life you want? Financial planning addresses that 5th dimension really well. We're pretty good at building financial wealth. But here's what I've noticed. When people retire, all 5 dimensions of wealth shift dramatically. But they were only prepared for the financial shift. Nobody warned them about the other 4. Suddenly, your time is all yours, which is exhilarating, but also pretty overwhelming. After spending so many years in your work routine, an open calendar can feel daunting. Similarly, many people's social lives are largely built at work. So when you retire, that can evaporate pretty quickly. Colleagues, structure, the challenges, the problem solving, and sense of being needed suddenly go from being a given to things that have to be actively rebuilt. And if you spent the last 10 years of your career too busy to exercise, you may be entering retirement carrying a health deficit. Conversely, if your job kept you active and on your feet all day, now you have to build a workout routine and plan ways to stay active because maybe that's disappeared. A great retirement isn't just about making sure it's adequately funded. It's about making sure you're funding a retirement that's adequately designed. Let me share a few numbers with you that reframe how we think about this. According to Stats Canada, Canadians are living longer than ever. Today's average 65-year-old can expect to live late into their 80s, with many reaching 90 and beyond. A 30-year retirement is now a very realistic planning horizon. That's longer than some people's entire careers. So you're not just retiring, you're actually entering a new chapter of life that's roughly as long as the career chapter that you're leaving behind. FP Canada's research consistently shows that Canadians' #1 financial fear is running out of money. But what the same research also shows, and this part gets far less airtime, is that retirees who report the highest levels of life satisfaction aren't necessarily the ones with the most assets. They're the ones with purpose. The most content retirees have strong social connections, physical health, mental health, passions and activities they can invest in, and of course, a solid financial plan underneath it all. That's what we call a return on life. Return on investments measures how well your money grows. Return on life measures how well your life grows. And a great advisor helps you with both. All right, let's move from diagnosis to direction. How do you find the answer? Scheffler found his answer in fatherhood. Jim Carrey found his by letting go of what external culture told him would make him happy. Their answers were different, but they found them the same way, by getting clear on what actually mattered to them and redefining what achievement meant. So here are 4 things I've seen make a genuine difference for Canadians working through this. 1. Plan your identity, not just your income. Your financial plan tells you how much you can spend from month to month, but it doesn't tell you how to spend your afternoons. Whether you're planning to retire or you're already in it, I'd encourage you to build what I call a life blueprint. Not a bucket list, but a structure that answers these 3 questions. Who am I outside of my job title? What do I want to build, learn, contribute, or explore in this retirement chapter? And lastly, who do I want to spend more time with? And how will I make that happen? These aren't soft questions, but for planners, they're essential inputs. They tell us how much you actually need, how long your runway may need to be, and what risks are worth protecting against. 2. Replace the structure that work gave you. Work gave you more than a paycheck. It gave you a schedule, a community, a place to go, a reason to get dressed, and a feeling of purpose. Then retirement comes along and changes all of that in a single day. The people I see thrive are the ones who intentionally rebuild that structure, and not the exact same structure, it is a different one, but they shift their mentality from building a life that serves their employer to building a life that serves them. Their day-to-day changes and their structure changes to accommodate their retirement lifestyle. It might include volunteering 2 days a week, joining a board, picking up a part-time consulting role, or finally starting that woodworking project that's been sitting in the garage since 2004. For most people, structure isn't the enemy of freedom. Structure is freedom. It gives them the context to actually enjoy the unstructured parts. Retirement isn't just an escape from the framework of employment, it's the opportunity to build your own framework. A framework that's centered around the things that you've always said you wanted to do, but just didn't have the time to do. Third, think in chapters, not a single destination. Here's a bit of a framing shift. Stop thinking of retirement as a destination and start thinking of it as a series of chapters. There are a few distinct chapters that you go through in retirement. The first chapter is the go-go years, and these years are roughly ages 65 to 72. This is a time of high energy, high travel, and high activity. This chapter needs the most funding, usually, because you're spending the most. The second chapter are the slow-go years, and these are roughly ages 72 to 82. This is when you're still active, but the pace changes a little bit. Life gets a little bit more local and a bit more intentional. Thirdly, we have the chapter of the no-go years, and these are the years of 82 and up usually. Firstly, this isn't as grim as it sounds. It's an era of legacy, of watching your family grow around you, of deeper relationships and simpler pleasures. It's the time to reap the rewards of the life that you've built. Each of these chapters has a different financial need and emotional need, and a good financial plan will account for both. And the fourth thing that I've seen make a difference is starting to build all 5 accounts of wealth now. If Bloom's framework resonates, and I really hope it does, here's the practical takeaway. Start building your time, social, mental, and physical wealth before you retire. Cultivate friendships outside of work. Find a physical pursuit that you can sustain into your 70s. Feed your curiosity about something completely unrelated to your career. Figure out what brings you meaning outside of your career so that when the end of that career comes and you're ready to retire, you're not starting from scratch, but you already have a foundation to build upon. The people who arrive at retirement with those 4 accounts outside of financial already funded tend to show up to my office glowing. The ones who've invested only in the 5th, the financial one, often end up like Grace did, comfortable financially, but confused with what to do with retirement. Don't worry though, Grace's story does have a good ending. Once she took the time to appreciate how normal this feeling is, she was able to find ways to work through it. She started building her way out of it. She joined a local pickleball club, started traveling more with a friend, and reconnected with her sister who she hadn't spent much time with in the past decade. All right, let's bring this episode home. We're taught to believe that the destination is where happiness lives. But after sitting across from hundreds of Canadians in the most significant transitions of their lives, here's what I've come to believe. Happiness doesn't live at the destination, it lives in how you build the journey. Happiness comes from how you invested in relationships, in health, in meaning, and yes, of course, in a financial plan that quietly handles all the math that underpins it. The goal isn't just to retire with enough money, the goal is to retire into a life that was worth working towards. Here are my 3 big takeaways from this episode. If you take anything away from today's episode, let it be these. First, the arrival fallacy is very real, and it's normal. If retirement doesn't feel the way that you thought it would, I hope you take comfort knowing that you're definitely not alone. That feeling is a very well-documented, universal human experience, not a sign that you planned wrong or that there's something wrong with you. Second, financial wealth is just one of the 5 dimensions. While financial wealth is obviously important, make sure that you invest in the other 4, the time, social, mental, and physical wealth before you retire, because financial security alone can't fulfill you in retirement. Third, design your retirement in chapters. Each chapter has a different need, financially and emotionally, and a good plan should account for all of these accordingly. And if you want to dig deeper into any of this, here are the 5 books that I genuinely recommend to clients working through the psychological side of retirement. These aren't sponsorships, these are just books that I've read, shared, and believe in. The first book is The 5 Types of Wealth by Sahil Bloom. This is the framework that we've been talking about today, a practical guide to designing a life around what actually matters using the 5 different types of wealth. The second book is How to Retire Happy, Wild, and Free by Ernie Zielinski, a bit of a Canadian classic on retirement purpose. Zelensky's irreverent style and practical exercises have helped a lot of people figure out exactly what they want from this chapter of their lives. Third is called Your Encore Years, The Psychology of Retirement by Richard Hemmer. It's a psychologist's take on identity questions that make retirement harder than it looks on paper. The fourth book is Keys to a Successful Retirement by Fritz Gilbert. Fritz retired early after an engineering career and has one of the most honest, rigorous takes on what this transaction actually feels like. And finally, the fifth book is called Happier by Ben-Shahar. That's the Harvard professor who coined the term Arrival Fallacy. It's short, practical, and grounded in positive psychology research, and a very good place to start. If today's episode resonated, I'd encourage you to start a simple conversation with yourself, your partner, or your advisor about what the chapters of your retirement actually look like. The 5 book recommendations from today are available at bayswaterwealth.ca/podcast, along with show notes and a guide to help you jot down some of the tough questions that you're going to have to answer when you enter retirement. If you're a client and want to request a complimentary book, just send us an email. And if you found this useful, share it with someone who's counting down to retirement. Sometimes the most useful thing you can give someone is a conversation they didn't know they needed. Finally, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube. I'm Patrick Briscoe. Thank you for joining me on the Canadian Retirement Roadmap podcast. And until next time, take care.
Trademarks owned by Investment Planning Council Inc. and licensed to its subsidiary corporations. Investment Planning Council is a fully integrated wealth management company. Mutual funds available through IPC Investment Corporation and IPC Securities Corporation. Securities available through IPC Securities Corporation, a member of the Canadian Investor Protection Fund. Insurance products available through Patrick Briscoe.